on whose behalf you will be speaking at this time for public comments. Those who are also attending virtually, if you wish to speak, we ask that you please use the raise your hand function. Okay. All right. So we see our agenda on the screen. So is there a motion to approve the agenda as it is presented?
Randy, this is Steve. I move we approve the agenda.
Okay. We have a motion from Steve. Is there a second?
This is Ann. I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Ann. Those in favor of approval of the agenda, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Thank you. The agenda is approved. So let's move to introductions of members of the board. Steve, you're first up on my screen. If you'll introduce yourself, and then if you would please call on one of the other board members to introduce themselves.
Fine, Randy, thank you. This is Steve Waugh. I'm a board member. I represent the general public, and I live in Topeka. So I don't see a listing of who else is here. Somebody grab it and go.
This is Richard
Bonnie
Brooklyn,
Limbird.
System Representative for the State Library Board, and I'll turn it over to Ann.
I'm Ann Adrian. I'm from Newton. I'm part of the boards on the Newton Public Library. Oh, I'll move it on to let's see who else is here.
I heard
Someone
Bonnie.
else go ahead. Yeah.
This is Bonnie. I'm in Prairie Village, Kansas, and a member representing the public. Sorry, Kim.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Beats. I represent Special Libraries, and I'm the corporate librarian at Black and Beach.
Do we have another member?
It's hard to see with the screen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Who else needs to go?
This is Susan Moyer. I'm in Junction City with the Dorothy Bramlage Public Library, and I hold the General Federated Women's Club seat on this board.
Okay.
I'm Ray Walling. I'm the state librarian. I'm going to pass it off to our newest member, Jeanette Parker, who is representing the private colleges.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Parker, and as Ray said, I represent the private colleges, and I'm in Wichita at the Kansas College of Osteopathic Medicine.
Welcome. I think I heard Bonnie. Bonnie, can you introduce yourself?
I already did, but thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Rhoda. Rhoda, are you there? Yes. Rhoda's using the chat. All right. Are there any other members of the board? Okay. Hearing none. Again, in case you joined us just a minute late, please use the raise your hand function if you wish to be recognized during the meeting. And the next item on there is the after introductions is opportunity for public comment. And again, we mentioned we can allow up to 20 minutes for that this morning, up to 3 minutes per individual. Do we have anyone that wishes to bring public comment today? I am not seeing anyone.
So
It
Randy,
looks like
Gail
Gail
raised
would
her
like
hand.
to.
Gail, okay, I'm sorry, Gail, please go ahead.
This is Gail Santee from the Central Kansas Library System, but I'm speaking as Gail Santee, private citizen.
Okay.
During the month of November, my brother-in-law was diagnosed with very rapidly advancing stage 4 terminal cancer with no hope of survival and no treatment available to him. And that cancer was in his brain, blood, and lungs. And he was no longer able to physically hold a book, nor was he able to track when reading. And it was very frustrating for him. I got him hooked up very quickly through Talking Books, and he was able to enjoy the service for just a few days before he passed away. But I wanted to make sure to say a big thank you to the Talking Books division for that. It was very much appreciated, and it brought him a great deal of comfort. And thank you.
All right, Gail, thank you. We appreciate those comments, and we offer our condolences for your loss there. Is there anyone else this morning that wishes to bring public comment? Ray or Wolf, if you don't see any others, I'm not seeing any others. So
I'm not seeing any others.
okay, thank you. All right, we'll move to item 5 on the agenda, which is the approval of the board minutes from September 29th. I might make note that those minutes do also include a copy of a letter we received from Hayes Public Library on September 27th that was received a little bit too late to be included in the packet, but it is included in the minutes for this meeting. So Chair would entertain a motion or ask if there are additions or corrections to the minutes. And if there are not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Any additions or corrections?
This is Bonnie. I would make a motion to approve the minutes from the November meeting.
Thank you, Bonnie. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second from a member of the board?
I will second it. This is Kim Beats.
Thank you, Kim. We have a motion and a second. Those in favor of approval of the September 29th minutes, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? Same sign. Minutes of September 29th are approved. Thank you. We'll next move to reports, and I will invite State Librarian Ray Walling.
Okay, just going to be a brief quarterly report, but update on staffing. The reference division hired a reference librarian, as you might remember, with Cindy retiring. Sarah moved up to the director position. Dakota moved up to the legislative reference position, and we had an open reference position. Hannah, who was in our statewide service division, asked to be considered for that position and was hired. So she is now in the reference division as the reference librarian. That means that we have an opening in the digital collections librarian position, which has been posted, and we've started receiving applications for that position. In the last 2 months, we have given Alice a new title, the Director of Library Development. As I've mentioned before, we were also going to hire an additional library development support person for that type of service. So that position has been posted, and we're waiting on more applicants before we can proceed with that. Following our last meeting, the executive administrative assistant, Jennifer Ragsdale, notified me that she was going to be moving on to a good opportunity. And while we're sad to see her leave, we're happy that this was a great opportunity for her. We posted that position and are still reviewing applicants and doing interviews for that position. So that's kind of where we're at on staffing. In October, I did library visits out to the central and southwestern portions of the state. I visited 7 public libraries, 2 community college libraries, and the Southwest Kansas Library System office. Later in the month, I had a one-day visit to Kansas City area libraries with Robin Westfall, who is the Missouri State Librarian. So we visited 2 libraries on the Missouri side and 2 libraries on the Kansas side, which was a great experience. And then also I visited Jeanette our newest board member, at her library after KLA. KLA this year was exciting. We were able to send 11 staff members who offered 5 sessions during the conference, as well as had opportunities to meet with colleagues to discuss important topics and plan for the future. They also were instrumental in manning our booth, which is an important outreach activity we have to make sure librarians around the state are familiar with our resources and services. So that was, I think, pretty well. Additionally, we had announced at KLA the beginning of a new subscription called PCI Webinars. This is a product that provides weekly webinars on library-related topics, as well as an archive of the previously recorded webinars that librarians can access. So these can be on topics, anything from generative AI to Spanish language programming to how to deal with difficult library patrons, etc. So we launched that new subscription service, which is available to any librarian in the state to take advantage of in the beginning of November, and have started to do some publicity around that resource. As you might remember, in the omnibus bill from last session, there was a provision for the Blind Information Access Program. We have gotten approval to move forward with the National Federation for the Blind's Newsline product to meet the needs of that particular program. So we have signed a contract to begin that service in January. Additionally, we have some other procurement items going on at the same time right now. So in the reference division, there is an RFP that we put out for news databases. We are waiting for the Office of Procurement and Contracts to finalize that contract, but we have made our recommendation. I had a brief conversation with them this morning, and they're going to double check to see where it's at today. So that's where we're at on that one. Additionally, I mentioned that we are moving to a new website, so we put an RFP out for a new website vendor. The deadline for the RFP is today, so we anticipate getting the responses for the RFP sometime early next week, and can begin the process of sifting through those RFPs or those bids for that contract. The statewide databases contract, which this group endorsed our decision to extend for 2 additional years. I sent that off to the Office of Procurement back in August to renew those contracts. While they didn't have any concern about renewing those contracts, they have kind of been busy with other things. So in my most recent conversation with them, they indicated that in January they intend to reach out to the vendors and make sure the vendors are fine with continuing the contracts based on the current terms, and we can have a discussion at that point if something has to change. So that's where we're at on procurement processes. Additionally, in October, I had the opportunity to attend the COSLA annual conference. COSLA is the Chief Officers of State Library Agencies. So each state and territory sends their state librarian or equivalent to an annual conference. The focus this year was on the reauthorization of the Museum and Library Services Act, which is the act that includes the Library Services and Technology Act funding that makes up 1/3 of our funding for the agency. So that reauthorization, I think, is coming up in 2025. So they're starting to gear up on reaching out to senators and legislators to get support for reauthorizing that act. During that discussion, there was some talk about the importance of funding for library infrastructure because there's seen a real need in that area. 2 different groups, the GAO and IMLS, are doing studies right now nationally of the libraries across the country, their infrastructure, the building, etc., to get an idea of what the needs are and how that might be incorporated into the reauthorization of the Museum and Library Services Act. Addition to that, during that conference, we had still the normal things where we have updates from our partner organizations like the National Library Service or the IMLS. We have opportunity for professional development and project sharing, to get an idea of what the other state libraries are doing around the country. I must say last fall, but probably before then, the governor issued an executive order asking agencies to update their continuity of operations plan. As I think I might have mentioned before, our plan hasn't been updated since Mark Galbraith was the interim state librarian back in 2009. So we really were in the need of updating that plan. So Laura, our IT consultant, and I visited a workshop a few weeks ago to look at how that plan operates and what the state wants us to do in order to update that plan, and have begun the process of updating the documents that are part of that plan. That includes, and the focus right now is on the teams that are associated with continuity of operations, as well as the order of succession, delegated authority, and facilities and backup facilities. So those are the first things we're focusing on, but there's other components that we'll work on later as well. In regards to the budget, back in September, I shared with you the budget proposal. Over the last 2 months, I've met with the Division of Budget and the Kansas Legislative Research Division analysts to answer their questions about the budget. Additionally, I mentioned that the performance-based budget document was delayed. That document was released in October, and I filled it out and sent it back. So that's what the legislature uses to evaluate whether a state agency or program is essentially doing what it's supposed to be doing. What I will mention about that was unique this year is they wanted the amount of money spent by division or program. So essentially they wanted an idea of how much does the reference division of the state library's budget versus the statewide services division versus the talking books division, to get an idea of where money is being spent. In the past, they had that requirement, but they didn't require us to break it out by category. This year, they required every agency to break it out by division or program. So that was a slight change, making that required. Additionally, Division of Budget notified me that they concurred with the agency's revised budget request and supplemental change package for 2024, as well as our budget request for 2025. However, they don't make a recommendation on the enhancement packages, but instead meet with the agencies to discuss what the agency is requesting and then share that information with various people. So I met a couple weeks ago with staff from the Division of Budget and the Department of Administration and the governor's office to share the enhancement requests and answer their questions. I will not know anything about the status of that request until the governor releases our budget in January. So that's basically a quick overview of some of the things I've been working on, but we're going to talk through some of the other things I've been working on in regards to the regulations, system plan, etc. later in today's session. Any questions for me?
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that very much. Unfortunately, Michael was not able to be with us today, but the Kansas Library Express Courier report is in your packet. Did anyone have any question or comment about that report that we need to relay to Michael? All right. Do we need a motion to approve that as it's presented, Ray? I've forgotten. I don't think so. It's just a report from Michael. So we'll move on if there are no questions then to the regional systems library reports. And this is open to system representatives who want to report. You have in your packet the grants and services report from South Central Kansas Library System. And I might call upon Paul Hawkins first. Paul, do you have some comments you wish to make about the report that is included in this section?
Thank you, Chairman Roberts. Just briefly, I know that many of you geographically live much closer to the Show Me State But this is the South Central Kansas Library System's evidence that regional library systems of cooperating libraries are important and valued by their members. Each of the regional library systems have methods in place for assessing and evaluating the needs of their member libraries. On an annual basis, the State Library Board receives our annual plans, and I know that coming up for 2025, there will be a new format for those annual plans that the regional library system directors have worked with State Librarian Ray Walling to complete. So every 5 to 8 years, we ask our member libraries, are we getting it right? Do we do it right? And again, fortunately, on the basis of the data that we received, we're doing what our member libraries want us to do. So even though this may seem gratuitous, especially because the results are, again, so affirming, I did want to say that just because Sickles member libraries value and find the services that we provide important, each of the regional library systems is different. They each have diverse sizes of libraries and types of libraries that they serve. So although we do things in common, what I believe the great value of the regional library systems is that they're organized and established to serve their member libraries. So that's one way I'm saying that, again, each system is different and they go about it. Each of us goes about it in a different way. So again, I appreciate this opportunity to show that regional systems of cooperating libraries are important and valued by their members. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate those comments and the report. Are there any other systems representatives that wished to bring a report today?
Sharon has her hand raised.
Sharon? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Randy, who has served on the SCK Executive Board very well, and I've appreciated his time on our board, and we are sad to see him leave. And just to let the State Library Board know that Sarah Owen at the Independence Community College will be stepping into the very, very good, large, important shoes that Randy will be leaving. So thank you, Randy, for all that you've done for the Southeast Kansas Library System and for serving on our board and for being a mentor to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon. That's very kind of you. Appreciate that. Any other system representatives wish to speak today? All right. If there are none, then do any board members today wish to bring a report? Anyone from the advisory board wish to bring a report? Now I'm having trouble seeing the hand raise feature, so if you do, call out.
No one has their hand raised.
No one? All right. Thank you very much. All right, then we will move on to the business items under number 7 on your agenda. And the first is the regulatory amendment update that Ray is going to bring to us. And so I will turn that over to him.
Thank you, Randy. So as you might remember, last September, we had recommendations from the committee that was looking into the Hayes and CKLS concerns. And basically that committee recommended a couple regulatory changes that the State Library staff and the council look at and basically draft some amendments to the current language. Additionally, the state librarian has been meeting with the system directors about other topics and has some other recommendations for changes. And then there's one recommendation, or actually 3 recommendations, to revoke 3 existing regulations that no longer are valid based on changes to the structures and relationships of the Talking Books division. So we're going to get started with 5418, Kansas Administrative Regulation 5418. This is the provision of free service. This was one of the recommendations that the committee made to look at this provision in light of digital resources, specifically concerns about license limitations and pricing models for digital resources that could make it difficult to provide free to all members of a system. Basically, that was the concern. Additionally, other concerns that came up is who determines if a library rule is reasonable, because right now the provision allows for reasonable library rules to be exemptions to provision of free service. And then retaining the provision of free service, yet allowing flexibility for circumstances that require reasonable library rules. So what I mean there, essentially, we have some instances recently where we've seen some difficulties with the provision of free service for digital resources that charge per use. And that's what we're kind of basing this discussion on. But we know in the future that there's going to be other pricing models, other products that could come up that could be a difficult to consider. How does the provision of free service apply to those resources and those pricing models, etc. So we wanted to create a rule that allows some flexibility in case there's other circumstances that develop in the future. So the best example of this, if we look at the Salina instance that we had in the committee packet, the Hoopla subscription was partially subsidized by the regional the regional system. In this case, Salina wanted to create a rule to limit access to the county residents. The regional system board did not believe this rule was reasonable. And then there was a disagreement there about how to proceed. There was desire to ask the AG for an opinion about digital services and digital resources guarding the provision of free service. In the end, what they decided to do was to reduce funding for Salina in regards to that subsidy. That was the current situation. If this amendment was promulgated, and this regulation as amended was promulgated, what I am suggesting is that the local library board be able to make the reasonable library rules, just as it is able to do now. However, if there is a concern by the regional system board can petition the state library board to review the rule and then make a determination if it's reasonable or not, and then what the ramifications of that decision would be, and that decision would be binding on both the regional system and the library. Does that sort of make sense? So at this point, what we're doing is we're having an opportunity for you to hear what we've come up with. And this language has been shared and discussed with the regional systems. It's been the regional system directors, and it has been shared with the Hayes and Salina's directors as well. So their feedback has already been incorporated into this language. At this point, I'm curious if you have any feedback or major concerns before I move forward with the process of actually amending the regulation.
Yeah, Ray, thank you. I should say, should remind the board that today is essentially sort of an opportunity for us to have a reading, ask questions, make comments, and so on. we're not looking for the board to make a motion to approve any of this today. It is more or less just a time for discussion and information on our behalf. So, and also, Ray, thank you for being with us today. I know you've been under the weather, so anytime you need to take a drink or a break, please do so to save your voice, okay? Right. Yes, Bonnie.
This is Bonnie. I just wanted to say that if the regional libraries in the system have reviewed it and have given their input so far, I'm on board with this. I was curious what the process is now, since I'm fairly new to the board, for making this type of amendment.
So there is I want to say it's a 90-page document of how a regulation is promulgated, and that doesn't involve any of what we've done so far. But basically, it has to go to the Department of Administration, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General for review for various things. There has to be a budget analysis or financial analysis. I don't think there's going to be an important financial analysis on this particular topic. But then after that, once we have the consent of those different groups, then we have an opportunity for public comment and public hearings where we'll get additional feedback and then come back to review that feedback and then decide whether we want to move forward or not. So that's kind of the process in a very quick nutshell.
Any other board members have any questions or comments on this first regulation? Not seeing anyone, hearing anyone. So Ray, if you're ready to move forward.
Okay, Kansas Administrative Regulation 54-115. This was not one of the administrative regulations that the committee commented on. However, in discussions both with the system directors informally and with Hayes and Salina, I think there was a desire to put some further clarification into this regulation. So based on those discussions, both groups had an opportunity to provide input into what you see on the screen. One thing I should note about all of these regulations we're reviewing today is I'm just showing what's added to the text, because if I try to show you what's deleted from the text, it just takes up too much space and it's difficult to read. You guys have the original language in the packet, so you can see that, what's stricken out. But this is just showing what it would look like if it's changed and what the new language is in that reddish color. Anyway, so this is basically if a library withdraws from the system, then the system currently can ask for the property that was bought with system funds or state funds be returned to the system. Okay, that's what the current language essentially says. This was written back in 1968. It's not clear for how long is that applicable. I mean, we have 55 years since that regulation was written. They have to return 55 years worth of materials and a property, etc. Additionally, there was a question about whether state funds should have to be returned to the systems because they're not system funds. And then there was also a consideration about, is the process different for closed libraries versus libraries that can continue to operate but just not be part of the system? So taking all of this into consideration, what we recommended doing was having the system board submit a list of property they wanted returned as part of the documentation they provide that is provided before the state library board has a hearing on the withdrawal. So currently, if you have a library withdrawal from a system, they have to petition the state library board to do that. And then a hearing is set. What this is saying is the system board needs to provide a list of property that it wants back prior to that hearing, so it can be considered as part of that hearing process. And then it's saying that the state library board shall then issue an order instructing the property that shall be returned, and basically that it's reasonable, whatever is requested is that's being returned be reasonable. So the state library would make the determination, is it reasonable to request the things that the system is asking back? Does that make sense?
So there's no time limit?
There's no time limit. I would say of all these regulations, we've considered a couple different options when we had our discussions, and one of the things was just putting a time limit in place. But I think we would rather allow some flexibility to in the time limit, but key in on the idea of reasonableness, right? So reasonableness is going to also factor into the idea of is the library continue to operate and provide services to the people in that area? And then how does that factor into the decision about what things need to be returned and what does not need to be returned? Does that help, Anne?
Yes, I think it may be difficult to determine what property is from the regional system. Is that a problem at all?
I think it's a problem in the current regulation. It doesn't really change by changing the regulation.
Right. Okay, gotcha.
It's going to be variant. It's going to depend on the system and what kind of tracking the system has on how their funds are being spent by each library.
And if a piece of property is owned by two different entities, then you've got a problem there too.
Well, in this case, what the regulation is implying is money that is spent with system funds is system property that needs to be returned. I mean, that's kind of what it's implying. But again, that idea of reasonableness is what the board would be asked to consider. Is it reasonable that the things the system board is requesting be returned should actually be returned? I would say the state funding in most cases is going to be minuscule anyway, so it's not really that big of a consideration. And it's kind of odd that the state money would go back to the system, especially if the library itself was going to continue to operate as a library outside of the system. Other questions?
Any other questions in addition to Ann's on this regulation? Right. I think you can move ahead. Thank you.
So it doesn't sound like there's any concerns on that one. Kansas Administrative Regulation 54-117. This was a recommendation that the committee made to look further into this regulation and the concerns that Hayes brought up as part of the committee process. I'm going to briefly summarize the concerns as one. They wanted the 2-year period between when a new system tax is added and the waiting period essentially until the new library can be removed from the system tax. Actually, pause a second. Let me rephrase that. Currently, if a library taxes 0.25 mil or more for 2 years, then they can ask to be removed from the system's taxing area. So a concern was raised that 2 years is a long period of time to have to wait for a library taxing entity to have to pay 2 taxes. And then the second concern is that a local electorate could vote to create a new library taxing district, wait 2 years, and then the state library board, when reviewing the request to be removed from the system taxing district, then declared that it would cause manifest harm and not allow that new library taxing district to be excluded from the system's taxing district. Does that make sense? So the concern is the state library board would be going against what the voters have voted, because the assumption is, I'm assuming the voters would assume they wouldn't be paying 2 taxes for library services. So the way that I have proposed dealing with these 2 concerns is one, actually the first one, the 2-year period, I don't know that we can deal with it because in statute, it says specifically that the tax has to be levied at 0.25 mil or more for a regular period of time, uses the word regularly. I don't know you could say something happens regularly if it only happens once. So I have difficulty creating regulation in that regard. The second topic, the idea of the state library board's decision on manifest harm being in conflict with what a local electorate decides in regards to a library taxing district, I tried to address by allowing a municipality or other entity to ask about manifest harm before an election ever takes place. So essentially, they could come petition the state library board and say, we want to create this taxing district and want the board to determine whether it would cause manifest harm to the system, assuming that that taxing district would be removed from the system's taxing district. In that case, the board would make a decision at that point, and that decision would be good for 4 years. So they could go ahead and have an election. They create the new taxing district. They could tax for 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, come to the state library board and ask to be removed from the system taxing district. Essentially, at that point, since the board had already made a decision about that taxing district and causing manifest harm or not, that wouldn't be consideration at that point. It's already been made. So then the question is, did it tax at the 0.25 mil or more for 2 years? And if so, then we're good to go. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Sorry, my brain's a little little tired. So I'm going to forward to this part. Yeah, Steve.
Is there a definition at all anywhere around it that defines manifest harm?
No. One of the things that the system directors and I looked at is some of the previous attempts by different groups to come up with the definition of manifest harm. We decided not to put that into the regulation and let that be a decision that basically the state library board would make, but the system would be required to make a case that it's going to cause manifest harm. So it's up to the system to convince the state library board that a library taxing district be removed from its system taxing district would cause manifest harm.
Okay, that's obviously in the unlikely attempt that this happens very often. It's obviously going to be a sticky wicket to deal with at that time between the entities that are involved.
Any other questions of Ray at this before he proceeds with the proposal on this? No. Ray, this is Randy. I guess if you could explain again the 2-year, 4-year issue. I think I got lost a little bit in the timing. This is how this is structured.
So currently the statute says that a library can petition the state library board to be removed from a system taxing district if it levies 0.25 mil or more for a period regularly. Uses the word regularly. In regulation, the state library board at whatever point decided that the term regularly means 2 years. Okay. So that is what the definition of regularly is and what we apply. So after a period of 2 years of taxing at that 0.25 mil or more, that's when the library can petition the state library board to be removed from the taxing district. So then, that being the situation, if we want to allow a library to ask whether manifest harm would be caused by the creation of a new taxing district through election or other means, then they could ask that essentially 4 years in advance. They could ask that when they're starting to think about having an election, and say, we're thinking about having a selection, here's our taxing district boundaries. Would this cause manifest harm? There would be an opportunity for the system to come back and provide their input on that. And then the state library would take those two views into consideration and make a statement on whether or not such a library taxing district, if it came into existence, would create manifest harm by being removed from the system taxing area.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the second 2 years of the 4 years, the second 2 years is under the new taxing.
The reason we have it as
process.
4 years is if they're prepping for an election for this new taxing district,
Uh-huh.
then they need to be able to ask us, have us make a decision, then have the election, have the new taxing district created, have 2 years after that they're taxing
Right.
at that level,
At that level, right. Okay.
before they can petition us. So that gives them flexibility to know what we're going to say before we even get to that final hearing.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. There are other questions on this, or Ray, do you have other comments on this?
I do not.
Okay. Anyone from the board? Okay.
Okay, next regulation, the Kansas Administrative Regulation 54-123. This has nothing to do with the committee or really the issues we just been talking about. This instead looks at how state aid is distributed to the systems. Currently, the formula that is in regulation is a little confusing for a variety of reasons, and also could lead to some potential challenges. So first of all, there's no clear relationship between how the factors of population and square miles are calculated as part of the formula. Our assumption is that they're added together, and then whatever a system's total is compared to all systems in the state, that's the percentage they get of the system aid. Additionally, the formula has not been followed for some time as it's written. The base grant has certain ways that it was supposed to be adjusted over time. I don't think it's been followed as well consistently. And then the more immediate issue is because we are at state aid being below the FY 1989 amount, the formula is irrelevant at the moment because it tells us that we have to distribute the aid equally to the systems. If you read the regulations, if we ever go back to being above the 1989 amount, the whole determination of how base grant in aid is determined for the systems is proportional to what it was previously, but we don't have a previous number to work off of. So in order to end the confusion about this, to get back on track and have a clearer formula, I propose some changes to this regulation. I have discussed these changes with the system directors, and I believe we are all on board with these changes because they do make it a little clearer. So what this looks like is, moving forward, the amount of money that's set aside for systems in the state aid grant would be divided in 2 parts, 3/4 of which would go toward the base grant and 1/4 of which would go to the formula part of the grant. So the base grant amount would be split evenly between the 7 systems. So whatever amount that is, say $700,000 divided by 7, $100,000 for each system for the base grant. Then there would be a fourth of the state aid that's for systems that would go towards a formula. The formula would be 1/4 of the population of the system added to the total square miles of the system territory. After that, they would determine what percentage of each regional system is of the total of all regional systems of that calculation. So essentially all square miles of the state and all people served by the systems. So what ratio, what is the makeup of each system of that total. And that percentage then would be multiplied times the amount of money that is available for the formula portion of the grant. The last part of it is, instead of citing the 1989 amount, which is kind of a random number, to set an actual amount that if it falls below that amount, that's when the equal distribution would occur. So I recommended $1.5 million being the amount that is set, rather than having to go back and see what was 1989 amount every time we need to see where we're at. So I know that's a lot to take in, but are there any questions? Yeah, Bonnie.
Yeah, do we know what the 1989 amount was? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I have looked it up before, because that's how I know we're below the 1989 amount. It's
Okay. Is this 1.5 million in the range of that?
I would say it's less. It would be less than the, or sorry, yeah, it'd be less than the 1.5 million. It'd probably be about 1.1, 1.2 million.
Okay, then I'm just follow up. What do we need to look at this on a regularly scheduled basis, just due to funding changes on an annual basis and inflation and whatnot? By putting a specific dollar amount in there, are we making more work for us later? Or is that going to stay pretty static? Do we want
we always can go back and revise this amount. But as you see, we haven't really changed it since 1993. So I see what you're saying, though, with inflation. That's definitely a consideration. Kim?
So what is kind of the reasoning for having the two-tier system in the first place? Is it because if you get to a certain level, then it is good to look at distributing based more on population? I'm just really wondering kind of what the thoughts are behind having such a honestly complicated system, both now and proposed.
Well, this regulation is based on what it says in statute. And the statute says that state aid's divided into 2/3 going to the public libraries, 1/3 going to the systems. The 1/3 going to the systems is to include a base amount and an amount determined by formula that takes into consideration the factors of population and square miles. So the statute didn't tell us how that was supposed to be implemented. It just said, here are the things you need to do. That's where the regulation came in. And back in 1993, they determined this was how they were going to do it going forward. Okay. So in a way, we're kind of bound by whatever the statute says. We have to have a base amount. We have to consider population and square miles. But beyond that, we can work however we want to work with that at that point. Does that make sense?
Yes. It just seems like this is a chance to kind of simplify it a little bit, and I don't know if this really does, but I don't know how to accomplish that either. So just wondering as some of the background for it.
Other questions?
Just, this is Randy. So Ray, just confirming that so long as you are at or below the $1.5 million, then this formula of 3/4, 1/4 does not come into play. It's an equal distribution among the regionals, so long as you're below that amount. Right? Okay, thank you.
Which that's essentially the case now. It's just it's the 1989 amount rather than a specific dollar number.
Right. So, Kim, Bonnie, anyone else have any additional questions on this? Seeing or hearing none, Ray? if you're ready to proceed.
54-124 would be a new regulation. This was a discussion that I had with the system directors, part of a different discussion that we were considering the creation of special library taxing districts and how we would consider those when considering the services and resources provided to those newly established taxing districts. So I think it helps to think through a scenario in this one. If a library expands its taxing district and is excluded from the regional system taxing district by special legislation, and the obligations of the existing library are transferred to the newly established library per the legislation, what would happen? Meaning, what would the system, would that library continue to be a member of the system? And what would the terms of that membership be? The current determination is that participation in a system is the obligation that would be transferred from the old library to the newly established library. And I should note that that's just an interpretation that could be questioned and potentially brought to the AG for an opinion. The recommendation in a new regulation would be that the library would need to reapply to continue to participate in the regional system. So they're changing the relationship that they entered the system under. So currently, let's just say Library A decides that their current library taxing district is not large enough for their needs. So they want to expand to the boundaries of their school district. The problem is that that takes money away from the regional systems taxing district. And then there's a question of whether that newly established library taxing district and that newly established library would continue to be a participating member of the library. So if they're removing money from the system's taxing revenue, yet they still want to be part of the system and still receive the same benefits and resources and services, that needs to be reconsidered because the terms under which they entered the system have changed. And that symbiotic relationship that I've talked about before between the local library, the area outside of the local libraries, and the regional system, that relationship has changed. So in an ideal world, the systems would be happy to have those people come back and provide services to those libraries. But there could be instances where the removal of the library, the removal of that taxing revenue from the system might be significant enough that the terms under which the library wants to participate just aren't going to work for the system. Does that sort of make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what this is proposing essentially is that when a new taxing district is established after January 1st, 2025, if it essentially is adding new, let's read what it says, any existing library participating in a regional system of cooperating libraries that expands its library taxing district shall be withdrawn from its regional system. The public library may reapply to participate in the regional system of cooperating libraries as specified under KAR 5413, so that's the current process. And then if after 2 years, the library decides not to rejoin as a participating library in the system, the system board can petition the state library board to have property returned to it that was purchased using system funds. So that's what it says. Yeah, Bonnie.
Laurie?
This just makes me think of the earlier amendment where we were talking about the property.
Mm-hmm.
Does this cause a similar issue where they just don't do anything for that 2 years, not realizing all the stuff they may have to return? Should there be a process or a step in here somewhere where they get a list of that real property that would be expected back from them if they decide to expand this taxing district and remove themselves from the system? Or does that even apply?
I think it's a challenge because the examples we're looking at are special legislation that's creating the taxing district. So it's not a process that's run by the board, like they're not petitioning board to expand their taxing district. It's done external of the board. So I don't think there's that opportunity necessarily for the system board to formally provide that upfront. They certainly could do that indirectly, but it's an I mean, what's interesting about this is this was something we wanted to add in because there's the possibility that a library might not rejoin the system. So that's why this is in here. But I'm just not sure how we would mandate it up front or include it in a process up front when we don't have control over that process.
Okay.
Does that make
So
sense?
maybe it's not something that can be a part of the amendment, but maybe it's just something that they need to know to do their due diligence
Yeah,
during
they
the
would.
process.
They could be informed at the beginning of the process of, if you're going to go forward with this, this is one of the things you have to remember is you could be asked to return property 2 years later.
Yes.
If you decide not to rejoin the system.
I think that would be wise.
Does manifest harm come in to this part as well?
In the example that we're looking at, we were talking about special legislation, that they don't consider manifest harm necessarily. That's whatever the legislature does, they make a decision. That's how they move forward. So
That's where the definition, as Steve was saying, would play a part, I can think.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was late. Had a 5th grade music concert. I was reviewing, and stop me if I'm repeating something that you said. I've only been on about a minute, but this is the one point that I was looking at, and I can see it from both sides. This amendment really will help the regional libraries and the libraries that are not looking to expand. If you're looking to expand, this makes it very challenging to expand your taxing district. Now, speaking for Andover, over half of our users don't live in our taxing district. To change the taxing district, you're going to have votes. And I don't think in this climate that might necessarily work. But so I could see why libraries would be concerned about passing this, though. It would prohibit them, for the most part, from expanding. But if I look at it, when I look at it through the lens of being the library director here in Andover, I do like this a lot. We had libraries in our system that wanted to expand their taxing district. Now, whereas that they're going to be getting more money at the expense of the rest of us, essentially, until you have this amendment in there. And I had breakfast with Senator Ty Masterson not too long ago, and he believes that you should not punish towns that are successful or you shouldn't punish towns that are successful and growing. If the library expands their taxing district, that's less money to the regional library system, which means less money to member libraries. So it's a bit of a loss when libraries leave. But I can see it from both sides. I did want to share that. That's what I wanted to talk about.
I guess the one thing I would add, Tom, to that is this doesn't prohibit them from leaving or from expanding their taxing district. All this is saying is that your new situation is going to be considered if you want to be part of the system. Because that factors, the systems are funded by the external areas outside the library district, and there has been a reduction in that service, in that taxing district for the system.
Yeah, and I think this really addresses that well. And you're right, the library could rejoin, and probably would be able to. But I just wanted the board to see that there are two sides to this equation. But I do think this is beneficial to the systems, and in the long run, it's going to be beneficial to most public libraries.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else have a question on 54-124? Comment, question? Okay. Ray?
Okay, regulatory amendments, 54-3 all deal with Talking Books program and the concepts of sub-regional libraries and essentially structures and relationships that no longer exist in how we operate the Talking Book services. So the recommendation of the agency is to remove or revoke these 3 regulations because they're not relevant anymore. And more importantly, I think it was either last session or the session before, the legislature is requiring agencies to review the regulations on a regular periodical basis and to remove and update the regulations to ensure that they're still valid and useful. So in a way, we have to do this anyway. If we're not going to use these regulations, if they're obsolete, we might as well remove them. So I don't know, there's a lot to discuss here because we don't use the structure anymore.
Any comment? Ray, does that bring us to an end of the discussion of regulatory amendments?
Yes.
Okay, since we're a little bit over an hour, if it's okay, could we pause the meeting for 5 to 10 minutes and give people a chance to take a break? Would that be good?
That's fine.
Okay, so if we will do that, we will just pause for about 10 minutes and then everyone please rejoin us. Thank you. All right, I see people coming back. We'll start again at 11:15, so just another minute or so. Okay, good morning again, everyone. It's 11:15. We will resume our meeting. We do want to thank Ray for that presentation on these regulatory amendments. As we mentioned earlier, we're not looking for official action from the board or motion or a vote on anything today. It was information, comment, question session, so we appreciate that. Was anyone have any final comment or question on the regulatory update before we move to the system plan template?
I just had a quick question. Does this mean now that we reviewed it this meeting at our next meeting in March, I believe, is that when we will vote if we want to finalize it, or does it have to go through all these other steps before it comes back to us for a vote?
It goes through all the other steps first.
Okay. Is there any kind of time proximization on that, like from past ones?
It's been a long time since the agency has done one, and I don't have any idea.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kim. Okay, Ray, if you're ready, can you present to us the annual system plan template that you've been working on?
Okay, so one of the recommendations of the committee was to develop a template for the system plan, annual plans moving forward. You can see that up on my screen right now. I can make it a little bit bigger too. A couple of the goals with this were to have a standardized plan that all the systems would follow as far as a template and a structure, creating standardized terminology that we're using to describe the things that we're doing, and then also address some of the more specific requests of the committee, such as getting the idea of what percentage of funding is provided for each of the grants or subsidies. Another example is the committee wanted to have further detail about how resource sharing allotments were determined. So they wanted some more detail. So those recommendations. The third one was they wanted some kind of way for the system to report that this is updates they made to the plan they submitted the previous year. So kind of taking all of those recommendations into consideration, reviewing the system plans that have been submitted previously. The system directors and I kind of worked through a structure that you see in your packet. The first part of which was to define what year we are talking about. So when we're talking about the plan year, for instance, we're talking about next January 1st through December 31st, essentially of the same calendar year. The current year is the year in which the plan was submitted. And then the previous year would be the year before the year that the plan was submitted. So for instance, in the 2025 system plan year would be 2025, January 1st through December 31st. The current year would be the 2024 calendar year, and the previous year would be the 2023 calendar year. Does that make sense? No, there was some confusion when we were considering the plans previously about what year we were talking about, and this is to help keep us consistent on which year we are talking about when we're looking at the plans. So then the plan submission, they would need to submit the plan by Memorial Day, or sorry, the Friday before Memorial Day of the current year. I provided some statutory regulatory information, as I've done with the other applications that we've had for other things. And then we have an area here where the system would be required to describe any changes they made to the annual plan for the current year. So the plan that they submitted the previous year for the current year, what changes have they made so far? That was concerned the committee wanted to know was, we want to kind of know where you're at, what changes did you make? And it's not that that's a bad thing necessarily. I mean, we have to be adjustable and adjust to circumstances, but they wanted some kind of explanation provided in the plan that would be submitted for the next year. Does that make sense? So being this application, they're reporting on so far this current year, what changes have you made from the plan you submitted last year? Okay. So then I have a section here on staffing and consulting to give an idea of how the systems allocate staffing resources for consulting purposes and other purposes that support the libraries in their systems. So if they have one person dedicated to children and youth services, they would say they have 1.0 FTE that they're providing for that type of service. That's going out and providing support to the local libraries and the participating libraries in their system. And essentially that would carry through on all the different categories that we've created here. So that's part of the plan, is describing how staffing and consulting resources are allocated. And then the other part is to talk about projects. And projects specifically refer to grants, subsidies, and services that are provided by the system. So for each project, say out-of-district borrowers grant was a project, they would have to go through, the system would go through and say, this project is whatever category. It is the interlibrary cooperation extended library service area category. The project name could be out-of-district borrowers grant. The eligible libraries could be any public library, for instance, or they could open up to other libraries. And then could clarify, is there any other requirements that would be in place that would exclude libraries that don't meet a certain circumstance? How much funding is allocated for this out-of-district borrowers grant, and what percentage of this grant is of all money that's provided for projects? Then provide a brief description of the grant, a detailed explanation of how the funding is allocated to libraries. So if it's the ratio of out-of-district borrowers to the total out-of-district borrowers for the whole system, and then multiply that by the amount that's set aside for this grant, that would explain to us how this grant is determined. And then describe all circumstances which could lead to a reduction in funding allocated to a specific library for this project. So essentially for each project, each grant, subsidy, or service, the system would go through and provide these attributes to help explain what these projects are. One of the benefits of this is it also standardizes information that then can be parsed out. We can see how systems are handling different types of projects across all 7 systems. And again, have some similar terminology on what these things are called. So that is the structure that we came up with. The system directors were consulted about this. We'd spent several meetings talking about this and try to incorporate their feedback into this structure as well. I think we realized that the first time we do this, we're not going to do it perfectly, but we're going to learn from it and we will make adjustments for the future. So having said all that, I'm going to open up to questions, comments, etc.
Yeah, Ray, this is Randy. So the system directors, I am assuming, agree that this template still allows them their a level of individuality in terms of uniqueness to their system or distinctive in their system. Is that right? I mean, in terms of, whether it's percentages applied or what projects are adopted or.
I think I'll let Richard answer that, and if you want to open it up to the other system directors, I think that would be acceptable
Sure.
to me.
I think the thought was, Randy, with this format, it gave us the basis to start with. It is kind of limited and what Paul submits and what I submit is completely different in the past. Like, we just do it individually per system. So it takes away a little bit of that individuality. Yes, makes it a little bit more barren, but it does provide for us, like, he does have the other categories. So if we're doing something different, we can list that out and explain what's happening.
Mhm.
For instance, like, we're in the middle year, could be wrong, don't quote me. I believe we're in the middle year of our 3-year one-time technology subsidy for public libraries, for public
Mhm.
patrons, excuse me. So that's a multi-year session where our members have the ability to apply. So that gives them time to at least have a year to consider, a year to apply. If it takes them a couple of years before they want to apply, the board will want to give that leeway. So that explanation can still be done within this plan. That's looks rigid, but because it has those others, I assume with the can't assume. I think we visited with this. I had to miss a couple of meetings, so forgive me, Ray, if I misspeak. And you could correct me. When you're providing descriptions of what the projects are, I believe those will be attachments possibly, if we need to go into further detail.
We said we could add attachments if it's not easy to describe in one paragraph or a short snippet, but a lot of I think what you guys do, you can kind of do within a short snippet.
So in essence, it's kind of shortening or limiting what you see in essence of the paperwork, but you're still getting the information that you're needing to see. And I think that's the intent that Ray was trying to do in this. And I will not speak for the other system directors because, like I said, I was not at every meeting because I had some conflicts. But I do believe we appreciated Ray working with us on this, plus on the past things we've discussed. He did include this like we requested, so we do appreciate that of Ray. So I wanted the board to know that as well. And I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Are there other comments or questions?
Randy, do you want to open that up to any other system director if they have any other comment before we get to the board comments?
Sure. On that specific question, yeah, or any other comment, do any other members of the system representatives wish to speak?
Well, Sharon has her hand up.
Aaron?
So it's very conceptual right now, and I need it to be more concrete. So I had asked Ray for an example. So I think that we'll work in tandem to get this first draft to try to figure out how to fit what we do into these criteria in a way that makes sense and isn't just a big befuddlement. So.
Any other system reps wish to speak? Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
I had a couple of quick questions. And I think this is great. I think this will help a lot, but I'm just curious, the project category and subcategory, were those based on anything else? Like, does that link back to anything else, or were these kind of newly created?
So it kind of relates back to statute loosely, I would say. So the purpose of the systems are to extend service to where it doesn't exist, but also improve existing services. So that first idea of library service improvement is an aspect of what the systems are meant to do. But then later on in statute, we talk about the importance of projects for interlibrary cooperation and resource sharing. That's not something that's necessarily delegated out to the systems, but based on the way systems are created and the way that they operate, I mean, they do projects that are beneficial for the whole system, right? We have shared catalogs that kind of thing, as well as other projects. So I felt like using that terminology that was kind of in statute would make sense, at least for those two broad categories, and then kind of go subcategory from there. It's kind of weird just having two broad categories, but that was the intent, was trying to go back to statute.
Yeah, I thought must be kind of connected to something like that. My other quick question is just kind of looking at like the project timeline and information points. Usually in a project there is some sort of like evaluation criteria, and I didn't really see that in a quick glance. I just wonder if that's a bullet point possibly to consider, or is there something else where kind of that gets reported back to the state board? I just like kind of a mechanism to make sure things are evaluated and things are working, I guess.
I would say that that's not required in the current structure. I think it's a good thing to have that in place, but I think it's something we'd have to have more discussion about. Excuse me, if we want to add it.
Okay. I just wondered if there was another way that information was shared, but something maybe to consider in the future.
Yeah, we do gather statistics of various sorts from the regional systems, but they usually don't refer to the project level of what the systems are doing. And each system, some of the systems have strategic plans and have kind of mechanisms for evaluation, but I don't think there's consistency across systems and how that's done. And something that I don't think we look closely at when we've reviewed plans in the past.
Thank you, Kim. Are there other questions from the board?
Richard has his hand up.
Richard?
Just a comment back on what Kim was asking. Different systems have different ways. As we discussed in our meetings, and I relayed with Ray that my board members want these as simple as possible. We do not put requirements on our grants that we send out. Sometimes we ask for receipts, but we don't actually ask for them. We just say if we ever decide to do an audit, they need to keep the receipts. They just want to keep it as simple as possible so they don't have to have that extra paperwork. The system over the many decades have been trying to do that for them. If there's a change, we'll move forward, but that's just for an example for my system. The mentality over here is keep it simple. We don't need to complicate things because it's already complicated enough. And the board is, like I mentioned before, they consider themselves, and by statute, they are their independent governing body. They determine on how they do this. So they don't see how it's this state board's area to question that, because it's the system's money. Now, state aid, different area, that can require evaluations back because that's coming from the state. But money that the system spends by itself, that we gather from our taxes and contract money, they see it as it's their duty to spend it how they deem necessary, not the state. So just an idea of what it's like here in Southwest Kansas.
Are there other questions or comments from the board? Ray, do you need anything else on this from the board today?
No, I think what Sharon said of coming up with some examples, working one-on-one with the system directors or in our group, as we develop these for this first go around will be really useful. So that way we can be moving in the direction that we want to be moving and modify as we go along over the years. So I thank you to the system directors for all the time they spent on this and the other things that we have been talking about today. I know it's been a lot of work for all of us, but I appreciate their valuable input that they've provided.
Yeah, Ray, thank you for saying that. And I wanted to say the same thing. I want to jump on that and thank the systems directors very much, and you for working so closely on these two items. So appreciate that. So collection development policy.
Yeah, so currently, the regional systems in the state library recommend that all libraries have collection development policies and that we have reconsideration policies in place. The state library has pieces of a collection development policy, but not a formal policy that I've seen anywhere in the documentation that I have. So I felt it was important moving forward that each division have its own kind of policies set in place. And in this case, today I'm sharing two of those policies, one from the reference division and one that's kind of a sub point of the reference division, which is the Federal Depository Library Program collection development policy. So according to the Federal Depository Library Program, we're required to have our own policy just for that collection. As a former depository coordinator, I know that because I've done it before. So that's what the second policy is. The first policy is focused just on what the reference division collects and provides access to. I want to see, Sarah, do you have anything you want to add to this before we get into any questions that people have?
I would like to say that this was a project that was completed by Brett Rody, who is our cataloging librarian, Leah Grote, who is one of our reference librarians, and myself. And as Ray mentioned, there were some components that were already out there on the website, but they were kind of scattered. And so we basically also felt that there were some components that were missing. So we as a team gathered what we were able to find on the website, created language for items that we thought were necessary, and then compiled them into this document that you see here. I think that it's already helped me being new to this role, so that's great.
So I think we'll go one at a time, Randy, and see if there's any questions about the reference service division collection development policy first.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone have a question of the policy that was included in your packet if you've had a chance to review that? Any questions?
I had a quick one on the guidelines for reconsideration library materials. I think it's really good to kind of have a policy in place for all that. I did notice the bullet point, a review committee appointed by the Director of Reference Services will meet as soon as possible to review the request. Is kind of the intention is that committee will be like state library staff, or is it kind of wanting to kind of keep vague about who would be on that with the situation? Or I'm supportive of it. I just kind of wondered the thoughts behind it.
I kind of see it as staff that would be involved. You know, if it was something maybe like reference material, then and obviously bringing Ray in on that as well. But yeah.
Do you think it would help to specify that it's going to be staff so there isn't any like ambiguity, you know, people on the outside thinking they should be on that sort of committee or anything like that? I don't know. Just a thought.
We can definitely do that. I can talk with Ray and kind of see what we want to do on that. But yeah, that's a good point.
But on the other side, you might want to keep it vague depending on the situation. So that may not be the way to go, but I was just wondering about that.
Okay. Yeah. I can definitely make a note and discuss it.
Other questions?
Yeah. Any other questions today? Kim, thank you for that one. Okay. Seeing or hearing none. Ray, do you want to go to the depository program?
Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it's different in the sense of this is part of the Federal Depository Program. There's certain things we have to specify in this policy, but it's the same introductory blurb that we just provided. Essentially, it's for the reference division and their collection, but it's a sub-collection of their larger collection. Are there any questions about this particular policy?
You want to have any question for Ray? Okay.
Okay. So the last one is the statewide services division policy, which was not included in your packet. We do have a draft version of that. However, due to the number of things that we have going on right now, and you can see in the packet, that one was held off until March. Another reason that was held off to March is over the last several weeks, having discussions with the Division of Budget and other entities, I'm picking up some other questions that I think would be beneficial to incorporate into our collection development policy, as weird as that sounds, but when we're talking about funding sources for our resources and trying to explain that to external agencies, I think it would be really helpful if our collection development policy was very clear about why we fund things through certain funds and budget units that we do. We did kind of make an attempt at that initially, and I think we did a good job, but based on the questions that were asked of me, I think it would be beneficial to do some tweaking of that section in particular. So I want a little bit more time to work through that and bring it to you guys in March. So that's kind of where we're at on that.
Anything else on the collection development policy discussion today? If not, item D is the 2024 meeting dates. We have 4 dates there. I believe those are Fridays. The September 27th one is a little later in the month due to the budget process. Ray, are we intending March and September to be in-person meetings? Or is there a plan for the in-person versus virtual?
That's certainly a point of discussion. I think the June meeting should definitely be in person,
Okay.
just because of what we discussed and how long it takes. I would like to see us have at least 2 of our meetings in person, and I do like the option and the opportunity for our members to attend virtually for those that have smaller libraries and can't get away all the time. So I think this balance of 2 in person, 2 virtual solely, but the in-person ones, there would be a virtual option, just like we've done this year, I think is the ideal thing. So again, maybe June and September be in person with a virtual alternative, but then March and December be virtual only.
Okay. All right. Do you set those for us, or do you need the board to take action or approval of these dates?
The board should take action on this particular item.
Okay. All right. So the proposal is the 4 proposed dates of March 8th, June 14th, September 27th, December 13th, with the June 14th, September 27th, primarily in-person meetings with a virtual option, March and December virtual meetings. Is there a motion from a member of the board to approve?
I so move, Anne.
Thank you, Ann Adrian. So is there a second to this motion?
This is Bonnie. I'll second that.
Thank you, Bonnie. We have a motion and a second. There any discussion? All right, those members of the board then in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Okay. Anyone opposed? Not seeing any. All right, motion is approved. Okay. That brings us to where the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Steve. I so move.
All right, Steve, is there a second to the motion for adjournment?
This is Bonnie. I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to adjourn today's meeting. Those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, motion carries. We stand adjourned with thanks from me, and on behalf of the State Library and Ray, thank you very much for attending today. Appreciate your participation. Ray, thank you very much for all that you do. I wish everyone happy holidays and a good season, okay?